truce has been announced in the U.S.-China trade war.
Trade war is not over. The 90-day pause is allowing us to, take a step back from the brink. But the story isn't done.
As negotiations continue, nationalism in China surges. President Xi pledges more support for the tech sector.
人工智能这个事业也是跟我们中国是现代化强国建设。
In the U.S., lawsuits are ongoing between the top schools and the government.
I think Harvard's a disgrace.
Targeting universities in such a blanket way, they might be hurting themselves inadvertently in terms of the longer-term effort to make sure that the United States still dominates in all the critical technologies.
Watch When Titans Clash on demand at cna.asia.
U.S. President Trump's threat of tariffs has shaken global markets.
It is sort of economic nationalism.
It is clearly a very transactional administration.
But trade isn't the only thing that has been impacted.
I don't think the Chinese are in any mood or have whatsoever to work with the U.S. on the fentanyl issue.
The silicon chip definitely will be lower. There's no doubt about it.
With Trump taking apart the global economic order, are we witnessing the end of globalization?
世界嘅貿易嘅規矩，我相信會重建嘅。
It's a busy day at this glass factory in Henan province in China. Workers are assembling vacuum-insulated glass for the company Leaders. Vacuum-insulated glass consists of two panels of glass that have been separated by a narrow gap from which all air and gases have been removed to create a vacuum. This vacuum significantly reduces heat conduction and convection, as well as provides sound insulation. This special type of glass is used in hotels, power plants, and residential buildings. While many of Leaders' customers are in China, it also counts on other markets.
We've always maintained a diversified global strategy with active expansion in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific. The US is one of our key markets, accounting for over 30% of our current export volume.
In 2024, the US was China's top export market. About 15% of all Chinese exported goods went to the US. However, all that is about to change.
April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
Since taking office, US President Donald Trump has unleashed a barrage of tariffs in an escalation to his trade war. On April 2nd, Trump announced tariffs on 60 countries or trading blocs, the most in more than a century. The Trump administration has described these as reciprocal tariffs, with Asia bearing the brunt of these punitive measures. Global markets tanked. Billions were wiped off the US stock market. Then, in a stunning reversal, on April 10th, the president announced a 90-day pause on most tariffs. However, a 10% blanket duty on almost all US imports remained in effect.
I think we should go beyond the thought, the idea that there is some economic logic or even political logic to what President Trump is doing. It is quite clear as an economist that there is no economic rationale to what it is doing. What he has done is essentially to declare war, not just on trade, the US's trade deficits, but declare war on the system of free trade, on the system of globalization that the US itself helped to create over the last 30 plus years.
So, what are tariffs? Tariffs are taxes charged on goods imported from other countries. When goods are brought into the US, the importer must pay the tariff to the government. For example, if a 20% tariff is levied on a product worth $100, the importer pays an additional $20. This will raise the cost of importing goods, which the Trump administration claims will incentivize companies to build in America instead.
So one of his greatest supporters are from the Midwest, the Rust Belt, who work in factories, but their factories unfortunately have moved to other developing countries because of the lower labor costs. And many of these manufacturing workers, they have lost their job, and he promised them he would do something to move back industries to the United States. So it is sort of economic nationalism. Another reason is he believed that he has to revert the huge trade deficit of the United States to all the world. So he's trying to use the tariff to achieve the goal. And he also said he wants to recover some revenue from levying tariff so that he could lower perhaps the income tax and also corporate tax. But I don't think it would work, because if you look at the size of the trade and the percentage he charges, it wouldn't be able to cover like the revenue loss from corporate tax and also income tax.
In Trump's mind, he wants to bring back a golden age. And the golden age for him is 1910s, 1920s America, when manufacturing was still a substantial part of the American economy. Today, of course, manufacturing is only about 7% of the US's GDP. So he wants to bring back manufacturing activities, manufacturing jobs to the US. But this is quite an unrealistic goal. American firms now face the difficult choice of move back or some manufacturing jobs to the US. That would cost them a lot more, because obviously labor costs in the US are much higher. But if they don't move their manufacturing jobs to the US, there's going to be a significant fall in demand for those goods they produce in China. They will hurt their profit margins.
Trump is no stranger to the use of tariffs. During his first term, Trump first applied tariffs with a 30% levy on solar panels and 20% on washing machines. Then he taxed imports of steel and aluminum. These moves set off a trade war with China. In his second term, President Trump has continued to wield his favorite trade weapon, though things are different this time round.
Now he has levied a broad-based general tariff on all imported goods. Some of these countries were actually his friends, like alliance, like the European Union.
I've been told that for a long time.
Territories which largely escaped the trade war during Trump 1.0 have been swept up in them this time. During Trump's first term, Hong Kong remained relatively unscathed due to the financial hub's special status. But that has changed.
過去 WTO 成立之後咧，香港係有個最優惠待遇國嘅條件嘅。我哋國家嘅政策咧，都係容許我哋香港有獨立嘅報關啊、關稅啊、清關嘅系統。2020年嗰陣時咧，美國已經係將我哋香港有部分嘅取消咗。當然我哋香港嘅問題咧就出現咗，可能每一次嚟到香港再轉口嗰時咧，都要加個中國製造呢個標籤啦。可能會成本會重咗。呢啲係進出口貿易嘅影響。
In 2020, the US ended preferential trade and economic treatment for Hong Kong. This meant that Hong Kong would no longer be treated as a separate customs and economic territory. Tariffs levied against mainland China would now also be imposed on Hong Kong. Eastwood Capital is a consultancy in Hong Kong that has been helping its mainland clients with the ever-shifting regulatory environment.
真正我覺得我判斷特朗普咧都會將個政策搖擺不定嘅，佢係將佢嘅貿易對手逼上死地，你埋台我重新同你傾過，每次傾咧都係會調整政策嘅。
While Hong Kong doesn't manufacture much, a lot of goods from the Greater Bay Area are exported through Hong Kong. Goods from manufacturing powerhouses like Shenzhen and Guangzhou all pass through the free port. Now, companies like leaders must pivot.
We are actively exploring joint venture opportunities outside of China. we are in discussion with our potential partners from regions that can serve North American markets more effectively while maintaining product quality and IP control.
Right now, Hong Kong, unlike the mainland, does not impose any tariffs on U.S. products. This has led mainlanders to seek out high-end U.S. products in Hong Kong.
Well, in theory, our imported U.S. products should be cheaper than in mainland China because we do not charge tariff. However, it could only be like for consumption, because if you bring those products across the border, the mainland China custom may charge equivalent tax, and they have been quite strict these days to, I think, to punish people for doing so. And another issue is China may depreciate renminbi, so it makes US products even more expensive. So even if we are tariff-free, they may not find it like a lot cheaper to buy it in Hong Kong.
But the territory has responded to Trump's trade war. On April 2nd, the US ended the duty-free de minimis exception for China. This exception has previously allowed goods valued at $800 or less to enter the US without paying duties. On April 16th, the Hong Kong Postal Service said that it would not be accepting US-bound parcels. But for the most part, Hong Kong has resisted applying reciprocal tariffs on US goods.
After the Second World War, when the mainland China has been closed, Hong Kong has been the entry port to transfer goods from outside to the mainland China and back from mainland China to the outside. It has always been playing this role, and I cannot see why Hong Kong should charge any tariff, unless Beijing pressure and say that you must do so. I don't think Hong Kong would be pressurized to do so economically.
But the impact of the tariffs could range beyond dollars and cents. Could it revive the trade in a deadly drug?
Our outside doors open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. All they have to do is to walk in, pick up the phone, and they can use the vending machine. It's for the community.
The first product that we want to make sure we put into the vending machines are testing strips. And so today we have testing strips for both xylazine and fentanyl. The testing strips are just to make sure folks have what they need to actually test their drugs.
These testing strips tell addicts if their drug of choice, like meth, has been laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic drug, and it is much more deadly than other opiates. It is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine.
A lot of my work is helping folks plan out events in the community, but also making sure we have programs like harm reduction vending machines where we partner with agencies to make sure people in the community have somewhere they can go to go and grab overdose prevention and harm reduction supplies.
Milwaukee County has one of the highest death rates from synthetic drugs, the chief culprit being fentanyl. In 2021, fentanyl became the leading cause of death among 18 to 45-year-olds in America.
Fentanyl is, for all intents and purposes, the worst drug crisis really in human history. You could say fentanyl is the third wave of the opioid crisis. So we had prescription pills like OxyContin, then we had heroin, and eventually, you know, there were so many new addicted users, there wasn't even enough heroin to go around. And so fentanyl came in and filled the void.
Fentanyl is a pain-relieving drug known as an opioid, similar to heroin and morphine. But unlike heroin, which is derived from poppy plants, fentanyl is entirely made in a lab. Hence, it is known as a synthetic drug.
There's other drugs that are even stronger and more deadly than fentanyl, but it's just so versatile. So it's a white powder, it can be smoked, it can be snorted, it can be taken in a pill form, and it can be mixed with just about any other white powder. And it's so cheap and so strong that drug dealers use it as a cutting agent, as an adulterant, and it's a way to make their products stronger and make them more cheaply.
About 2 milligrams of fentanyl, similar to 5 or 7 grains of salt, is enough to kill an adult human.
I nearly killed myself using heroin and fentanyl due to a bad dose of dope. I got a hold to, which was later I found out that it was a mixture of fentanyl that was put on the dope that nearly took my life. They call it on the streets the zombie dope.
Gregory Simmons is a resident of Milwaukee and a recovering addict. For the past 2 years, he has been seeking help at Serenity Inn, a treatment center for people struggling with substance abuse. However, the road to recovery hasn't been easy.
I didn't really know if I really was going to stay. I just wanted to get clean. I still wasn't at that point where I was totally willing. You know, I'm of age, pretty well set in my age. I've been on the streets all my life. I grew up without parents. I knew nothing but the streets. But it was something about this experience that moved me. I knew I didn't want to die, living the life that I was living, and have my family grieve this type of grief because of the choices I made. So it was time for a change.
Gregory is one of the lucky ones who survived. In a 12-month period from September 2023, almost 90,000 people died of drug overdose in America, nearly 80% of which were caused by synthetic opioids. With so many deaths, people were looking for someone to blame.
We're talking about a tariff of 10% on China based on the fact that they're sending fentanyl to Mexico and Canada.
President Trump blamed Canada, Mexico, and China for America's opioid crisis. So, in February 2025, President Trump placed a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. In March, the president increased that tariff to 20%. For years, America had alleged that China exports the needed chemicals to drug cartels that make synthetic opioids. A claim that journalist Ben Westhoff had previously traveled to China to verify.
When I went there in 2018, there were totally legal, above-board companies that were selling these fentanyl products, these fentanyl analogs.
Analogs are slight chemical modifications of the original chemical. For example, this is the chemical formulation of fentanyl. But by removing a carbon and 2 hydrogen atoms, it becomes acetylfentanyl, an analog with similar effects to fentanyl. Analogs can be easily converted into fentanyl. They may escape detection, and some are not even classed as controlled substances.
So, fentanyl has been banned in China for a long time, but all the chemists had to do was just subtly tweak the molecule. All of a sudden they had a brand new chemical that was totally legal, but just as deadly as fentanyl. And so eventually the government would ban each of these analogs one by one by one. But then all the chemists had to do is tweak it a little more. There was kind of an international outcry about this. And finally in 2019, China banned these fentanyl analogs all at once. This was something the United States wanted them to do, and they finally did it. So in some ways, China has been complying with what the U.S. wants.
This led drug cartels to turn to fentanyl precursors instead. These are chemical compounds used in the synthesis of fentanyl. However, these chemicals also have legal uses in the manufacture of legitimate medicines.
There's a very significant global trade of these pharmaceutical products, which are much needed in some parts of the world for medical procedures, for medical purposes. And that means that legal trade of these products will need to remain available and will need to be upkept.
And so that's where this company where I went undercover specialized in. They were making fentanyl precursors. They were mostly selling them to some customers in the United States and a lot of customers in Mexico because they were selling directly to the Mexican cartels. And the Mexican cartels take these fentanyl precursors and they make them into finished fentanyl, at which point they send them north of the border into the United States.
China suspended drug cooperation in 2022 after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. But in 2023, at the sidelines of the APEC summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to restart cooperation on the issue after meeting US President Joe Biden. The two countries will set up a joint anti-narcotics task force in 2024.
There have definitely been some efforts within China to better control some of the precursor production within China. And one thing that we've seen whenever there are policies put in place in China, whenever there are controls put in place, those controls tend to work really well, and they tend to put quite a lot of effort on making sure that they work well.
But now, President Trump is again blaming China for the opioid crisis, using trade as a cudgel. He has removed the de minimis exception for low-value imports from China. The US said that China had used this exception to hide illicit substances in low-value packages. In addition, on April 9th, the Trump administration slapped additional tariffs on Beijing, bringing China's tariff rate to at least 104%.
I think the fentanyl issue is one consideration, but I don't think it is primary. I think its primary motivation is to reduce the US's trade deficit, particularly with China. As for the fentanyl issue, if that was the motivation, then the means that were used, tariffs, very high punitive tariffs on imports from China, have effectively undermined the US's ability to use these tariffs to obtain support or obtain cooperation from the Chinese side. If the US had engaged in some sort of negotiation, where if you were to help us with the fentanyl issue, we would not impose tariffs or not impose such high tariffs on us, then I think that there could have been progress.
What followed were tit-for-tat tariffs. China hit US goods with an additional 50% tariff, bringing the accumulated total to 84%. Trump then hiked tariffs on China to as high as 145%. On April 11th, China reciprocated by bringing tariffs up to 125%. China has said that tariffs jeopardize further cooperation on the fentanyl issue.
美方以芬太尼为借口，对中国无理加征2轮关税，中方均第一时间采取包括关税和非关税措施在内的反制举措，坚定维护自身正当权益。这些反制措施仍然有效。
Since China clamped down on fentanyl-related chemicals following the Biden-Xi meeting, fentanyl deaths are on the decline. In March 2025, the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse announced an over 30% drop in fentanyl deaths over the past year. But the trade war could reverse all the progress that has been made.
I don't think the Chinese are in any mood or have any appetite whatsoever to work with the US on the fentanyl issue. In other words, the tariffs have actually undermined the US's, whatever US's efforts were or whatever they were thinking of achieving on the fentanyl issue.
Whatever comes, every day, Jeremy continues to work to rid his community of drugs.
We're raising up a generation of people who know without a shadow of a doubt the impact substance use has on generations. With that fuel, together, we're gonna beat the villain. No, I know how to help my community, right? Because I lived in it already. That's what's gonna change it. And so to me, the hope, the promise, the guarantee is in work like this.
Meanwhile, for a close American ally, the tariffs could be the death knell for one important industry.
This is my journey from farm to table.
Malay food is well balanced between spice and the other things that balances the spiciness.
Nose to tail.
Coming along nicely.
Yeah.
Yellow is the color of sultans.
All the way up north in Malaysia in search of all things spicy.
Bagus.
In Search of Heat, Wednesday on CNA.
Lives taken, cities leveled.
$53 billion to rebuild an area that is lying under 50 million tons of rubble.
Living in limbo and loss. What does it take to rebuild from the ashes of war? Tallying up the cost of conflict. Wednesday on CNA.
This is Steel End. It's an industrial complex about 2 hours southwest of the South Korean capital, Seoul. The area is filled with small companies manufacturing all types of steel products. Like Chungdo Steel, a small family-owned business.
이걸 철판과 수den을 사이즈별로 절단하고 각도별로 꺾는 데예요.
Ki-yun has been in the steel industry for 25 years. South Korea has consistently ranked among the world's top steel exporters. The country exports around 30 million tons of steel products each year.
그래서 한국의 철강 산업의 장점은 고부가 가치 철강을 생산할 수 있다라는 점이 장점으로 꼽고 있습니다. 한국은 파이너스 공법이라는 것을 채용을 합니다. 이게 뭐냐면 유연탄을 역청을 다시 분재로 만드는 과정 없이 바로 분광 자체에서 바로 들어가서 이제 재련을 하는 그런 과정인데요. 이 과정에서 이산화탄소 배출이 그만큼 없어지죠. 정제 과정이 없어지니까. 그 다음에 이제 이 과정에서 원가 절감이 가능합니다. 한 단계가 생산을 해서.
In 2024, around 10% of South Korea's steel exports went to the US, but this is now at risk. On February 10, 2025, President Trump announced a 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum products. His rationale was to ensure the US would never rely on foreign countries for critical materials.
현재는 그냥 마이너스죠. 전 가족끼리 하니까 그냥 긴축하고 그냥 견디고 있는 거죠.
언제까지 이렇게 어려운 상황이 계속될 것 같으세요?
저희 같은 소규모 저희는 모르죠, 잘 이제. 근데 막 금년 한 해 이상 다 그렇게 될 것 같은 느낌이 드는데요.
Korea is number 4 import country of the steel, and number 1, 2, 3 are like Canada, Brazil, Mexico, and then Korea is following them.
In 2023, South Korea exported over $600 million worth of aluminum products. Exports of steel were even greater at $1.9 billion. South Korea had previously benefited from a duty-free steel quota under an agreement made in 2018 during Trump's first term as president, escaping the first trade war. This time around, things are different. South Korea would no longer be exempt.
알루미늄에도 25% 관세 지금 부과하겠다라고 해서 사실 저희 업계에서는 지금 사실 초비상입니다.
트럼프는 지난번에 대통령 선거 과정에서도 얘기했지만 미국 제조업을 부활시키겠다. 그래서 미국의 현지에서 제조업을 생산을 하게 하고 또 그 과정에서 러스트벨트를 중심으로 한 고용 문제를 해결하겠다고 하는 것이 기본적인 문제인 것 같은데 이런 관세 부과는 한국의 소위 말해서 가격 경쟁력을 떨어뜨리기 위해서 타시장으로 지금 돌리든지 아니면 현지 생산을 하든지 하는 그런 결과를 가져오게 될 것 같습니다.
Any tariffs on South Korean steel come at an already difficult time for the industry. Last November, steel giant POSCO shut a 45-year-old plant. It also laid off hundreds of workers. The country's steel makers have struggled to compete with China on costs. In September 2024, South Korean steel was priced at $2,570 per ton, while Chinese steel costs an average of $863 per ton.
예전 같은 10년 같은 경우에는 중국산 제품이 저가에 싼 맛을 썼다고 그랬어요. 그리고 품질이 퀄리티가 되게 떨어져요. 근데 지금은 달라요, 말이. 중국산 제품도 지금 퀄리티가 되게 올라가 있고 제품도 좋아요. 그리고 가격이 싸고 그러다 보니까 저희 같은 수요 입장에서는 아무래도 굳이 국산 걸로 해주세요 아니면 중국산을 쓰죠. 중국산을 쓰죠.
중국이 10억 톤을 연간 생산을 하기 때문에 지금 중국에서 저가의 대량 물량 공세를 해버리면 세계 시장은 중국이 석권하게 되는 그런 상황이라는 것이 그 중장기적인 원인이라고 볼 수가 있겠습니다.
At the same time, Korea's domestic demand is not enough to sustain the industry.
한국의 철강 산업이라는 게 보면 전방 산업인 건설, 자동차 이런 산업들이 이제 성장을 해야 소위 말해서 크는 산업이 철강 산업이죠. 그러니까 기본 인프라 산업인데 지금 아시다시피 건설 경기가 완전히 한국에서 죽어서 침체 때문에 철강에 대한 수요가 그만큼 죽었다는 것이 단기적인 이유고요.
In the first quarter of 2025, the value of completed construction fell almost 21% in South Korea. It is the fourth consecutive quarterly decline and the sharpest drop in 26 years.
일단 막막했죠. 가슴이 좀 먹먹하다 그러잖아요. 그러면 이걸 팔로로 이어져야 되는데 이 팔로로 이어지질 않아요. 왜냐하면 받는 입장에서는 야, 이 가격 맞춰라 하는데 저희가 어떻게 그 가격 맞출 수 있겠어요? 100원 하던 게 지금 130원, 150원 하고 맞출 수는 없죠.
Steel isn't the only South Korean industry feeling the pain. On April 3rd, Trump triggered a 25% tariffs on all vehicle and auto parts imports. The US is the top market for South Korean car makers. In 2024, the South Korean auto parts industry exported $8.22 billion to the US, up from $8.06 billion in the previous year.
우리 업계로서는 아무래도 수출을 많이 하는 국가이고 또 특히 미국의 우리 전체 작년 전체 대세계 수출 중에 한 40% 가까이를 미국으로 수출을 했습니다. 그래서 이런 관세로 인한 수출 감소가 조금 우려가 되는 상황입니다.
There may be some relief for the vehicle industry as Trump has softened his stance on auto tariffs. On April 30th, 2025, the White House said foreign auto firms paying tariffs on car and auto parts would not be subject to double levies, such as those on steel and aluminum. Nonetheless, the current trade tensions has upended the close trading relationship between South Korea and the US. Since 2007, both countries have had a free trade agreement, or FTA. This trade pact eliminated trade barriers between them and covers about 95% of consumer and industrial goods.
이런 발언을 하니까 굉장히 지금 혼란된 그런 상황인데요. 트럼프의 관세 정책은 한마디로 지금 FTA라는 양국 간에 맺어진 그 약속 자체를 없애는 그런 관세이기 때문에 좀 상당히 곤혹한 그런 상황입니다.
To soften the blow, Seoul unveiled a $2 billion emergency package for car makers. Under the program, the government will expand its low-cost financing for the auto industry. Affected companies can also apply for tax deferrals for up to 9 months. But tariffs isn't the only thing hurting South Korea. Its economy is also slowing. In 2024, South Korea's economy grew by 2%. In 2025, it is projected to grow between 1.7 to 1.9%. Seoul has said that adjusting the US tariffs will be a top priority in its upcoming dealings with Washington. But talks might prove complicated.
이 협상은 지난번에 이제 트럼프가 제안을 하더라고요. 원스톱 쇼핑 형태로 하자. 안보 품목하고 그리고 이제 방위비 문제나 뭐 이런 문제 하고 그런 문제와 통상을 연계를 해서 하자고 그러는 거 보니까 예를 들면 지난번에 이제 1980년도 초에 일본 자동차가 미국 시장을 석권을 하면서 일본 자동차에 대해서 빅3가 이제 의회에 제소를 해서 어떤 걸 얻어내냐면 Voluntary Export Restraint라고 그러는 소위 말해서 수출 자율 규제를 얻어냈거든요. 그런 식으로 해서 또다시 그걸로 가든지 물량 제한으로 가든지.
어찌됐건 뭐 최선의 상황은 다시 원래대로 한미 FTA를 서로 존중하는 차원에서 이제까지 잘 지켜왔던 것처럼 한미 FTA를 기반으로 한 자동차 부품 교역이 계속해서 일어나는 게 제일 좋은 방향이고요. 그렇지 않은 방향들은 좀 어려운 부분이 있겠죠. 뭐 정도에 따라 달라지겠지만.
Seoul is hedging its bets. In March 2025, South Korea, Japan and China held their first economic dialogue in 5 years. The Korean government announced that it will proceed to establish the trilateral FTA at the earliest possible moment.
이게 한중일 3국 FTA는 사실 20년 된 사실 묵은 과제인데 특히 농산물이나 중국의 어떤 값싼 제조업 제품 때문에 시장 잠식 때문에 서로들 꺼려왔었는데 지금 본격적인 한중일 외무장관이 지난번에 만나서 FTA 얘기를 꺼낸 거와 마찬가지로 이런 트럼프의 의의가 한중일 FTA를 본격적으로 추진하는 어떤 계기가 될 가능성은 충분히 있다고 봅니다. 그러나 성사 여부는 아시다시피 굉장히 그 복잡한 역사적인 경험 또 과제 때문에 그렇게 쉽게 이루어지지는 않을 것이지만
To add to the complexity, the South Korean government is in a state of uncertainty. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached after an aborted attempt to declare martial law in December 2024. On June 3rd, South Korea would hold snap elections to elect a new leader. This new leader could have a different view of how to approach US-Korea ties.
우리는 정권 바뀔 때마다 친중이니 친민이 뭐 이렇게 하면서 지금 막 바뀌고 있는 상황이라 굉장히 어떤 일관된 외교 정책. 어떻게 보면은 그것이 플렉서빌리티라고 하는 어떤 융통성을 보장한다고 볼 수도 있지만 그런 장기적인 측면에서 보면 어떤 일관성 있는 외교 정책 이것이 지금 아직 부족하다 이런 생각이 듭니다.
In terms of the economic policy, especially economic policy against the or with the United States, maybe, there's no kind of home team and away team, right? So we have to be one team. So I think this is something that the upcoming new administration in Korea, they have to be kind of having in mind.
Elsewhere, another American ally could face an existential threat from tariffs. Scientech, or Sin-Yun in Mandarin, is an equipment manufacturer for the semiconductor industry. The company products are used for wafer manufacturing. It's based in Taiwan, the global semiconductor powerhouse.
台湾的半导体客户几乎占了星云整个营业额的60%。那星云除了在台湾以外，在 China、韩国、欧洲、美国，我们都有分布不同的一个客户群，包括东南亚的一个部分，所以海外的业绩大概占了40%左右。
One of Scientech's customers is the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. TSMC is the world's largest semiconductor foundry. A foundry manufactures chips for other companies rather than designing or branding its own products.
So it's a very big company. It controls the most advanced technology for making the chip, the most advanced chips. So China relies on it, the US relies on it, and the whole world relies on it.
TSMC produces about 90% of the world's advanced chips. Almost all of its production capacity, about 80 to 90%, is based in Taiwan. With TSMC being so critical to the global semiconductor industry, its location in Taiwan has often been referred to as a silicon shield.
The so-called shield means if Taiwan has all the production capability for advanced logic product, then US might consider put more effort to protect Taiwan away from China's invasion.
所以未来的世界，如果是以一个晶片驱动为主的经济来看，台积电的角色相当重要。那整个台积电的供应链，其实如果从它下游应用的客户端来看通讯啊、车辆啊、AI 啊、机器人这些未来前瞻性的技术，都需要依赖它的技术去 support。
However, Trump could change Taiwan's chip dominance. The American president is threatening a tariff of up to 100% if TSMC does not build its plants in the US.
So for these high-tech industries, Mr. Trump wants to make at least a large portion of it back into the US. The US want to decrease the reliance on Taiwan or South Korea or Japan on these very important high-tech industries.
我相信美国在税率这一块针对半导体的一个部分，实际上唯一不变的就是每天都在变，所以实际上我们也没办法去 control 美国政府怎么来操纵这些汇率的一个部分。
In March 2025, TSMC announced that it would invest at least $100 billion to build new chip-making and packaging facilities in America. This was on top of a $65 billion investment that was previously promised for 3 chip-making plants.
My belief is TSMC was forced to go to US way before the tariff issue. So they already have a plan to go there. But maybe the initial plan is not that significant. This particular $100 billion investment is after Trump and CC Wei's meeting. So apparently in that meeting, I assume the tariff was mentioned. And that create additional pressure for TSMC to go and to making sure that tariff doesn't apply, at least to TSMC. So it definitely has an effect.
TSMC also announced in April that it was going to make 30% of the world's most cutting-edge semiconductors in Arizona.
One of the most challenging for TSMC going to US is the cost efficiency, because in general, the price, everything is more expensive. And also the cultural-wise, the work-life balance is more general to the Western culture. And Taiwan typically can work a longer hour for that.
Should production capacity for advanced chips leave Taiwan, what happens to its silicon shield?
I think there will be no impact on the so-called silicon shield because most of the supply chain still remain in Taiwan. Taiwan keeps the whole supply chain. We have the whole education system to train for the engineers. Taiwan's headquarters controls everything. Taiwan still controls, for example, TSMC still, there are over 80% of the chips still making in Taiwan. So it will not impact the silicon shield at all.
So moving the shield definitely will be lower. There's no doubt about it. But I always believe we shouldn't put all the eggs in one single basket, like a silicon shell. There are so many things Taiwan and US can work together to collaborate to have a win-win situation so that US will consider Taiwan as an ally to help Taiwan to protect Taiwan.
In any case, the Taiwanese government is preparing for this eventuality. In April, it passed an amendment to restrict the export of the most advanced process technologies, allowing only those of the previous generation to leave the country. This will apply to TSMC's US plants. The move is seen as a safeguard to maintain its silicon shield. The amendment also limits outbound semiconductor investment.
台湾其实并没有放弃啦，我觉得台湾基本上内部一直在做一件事情，就是我们如何强化我们在半导体产业上面的一些关键地位。那我们现在的方式其实应该是说有一点细盾2.0的逻辑啦我们如何强化在整个半导体产业台湾公司甚至是台湾人去控制这样产业的能量。
As the US pulls back, other countries have sought to deepen ties. In April 2025, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia rolled out the red carpet for Chinese President Xi Jinping as he made a week-long trip to the region. Malaysia, the current chair of ASEAN, has also called on the bloc to band together to respond to the tariffs. Southeast Asian countries have been among the hardest hit by Trump's tariffs.
ASEAN, hopefully, and I believe they have come to a realization that indeed sort of not just working harder and being more committed to cooperation, but really accelerating those efforts is going to be quite critical, on the economic and trade front. I'm not even sure that it's on the mind of Trump administration officials is the advantages that the United States is ceding to your competitor, China. The Chinese have made it very clear that we are going to be the champions and the anchor of the trading regime. There's going to be alignment in the sense of regional states looking for other opportunities and trying to work together better and faster in order to make sure that trade continues as smoothly as possible.
For 90 days from May 14th, the US will reduce tariffs imposed on China to 30%, while China will reduce tariffs on US imports to 10%. A US trade court has blocked Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, though the administration is likely to appeal this ruling.
Whether it's all part of a big strategic, grand strategy of the Trump 2.0 administration, honestly, I don't know. I honestly don't know because it's unpredictable. It manifests in so many ways. The Chinese, on the other hand, are scratching their heads. What exactly does he want from us, right? One moment is this, next moment is that. So it's difficult to sort of divine some kind of grand strategy behind it.
Regardless of what comes next, the damage has already been done. According to the World Economic Outlook report, global output was 3.3% in 2024. This will slow to 2.8% this year.
The benefit of cooperation is people can find the cheapest place to do a most efficient product. But because of this anti-globalization, that probably cannot reach anymore. So price will go higher.
I think there will be an erosion of trust in the US, especially on the part of their traditional friends, partners, allies, as they will put it. It is still, as of today, the most powerful economy, military, political actor globally. You cannot wish it away. You cannot not work with it. And many countries still want to work with it and benefit from working with it. Countries that have had long-standing relations with the United States have invested heavily in developing the connections across government agencies. But at the same time, with an administration that wants to be transactional about everything, it cannot but erode some of the trust and goodwill.
For a few days, India and Pakistan engaged in the worst conflict in decades.
We launched the attacks against terrorist camps. Then they started their firing across the border.
I think India very clearly violated Pakistani sovereignty.
While an uneasy truce holds, what could tip it back over the edge?
Water is an existential issue. I foresee a possibility of armed hostilities over this.
You saw a huge amount of misinformation.
It's not a tenable ceasefire.
Insight, Thursday on CNA.
ASEAN, made up of 10 countries and 700 million people. China has been making significant inroads here.
The East Coast Rail Ring connects the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia to one of our major Port Klang.
This would be a shining example of the economic cooperation that has existed between Malaysia and China.
Now in Indonesia, China is our largest trading partner.
自2004年起，中国是越南第一大贸易伙伴。自2016年起，越南是中国在东盟第一大贸易伙伴。
The mistrust of China is still there, so it will not disappear overnight just because of problems Mr. Trump is creating for Vietnam.
China and the Global South Season 2, premiering on the 9th and 10th of June on Monday and Tuesday.
He pushed me down the stairs.
Do you think the school is doing enough to tackle bullying?
The issue of bullying has become a lot more complex. We are trying.
Her psychiatrist told me she got suicidal thought.
Are there lessons to be learned from South Korea where bullying is a national concern? A 1-hour special, Talking Point, Sunday on CNA.
At the prestigious New York Festival's 2025, CNA took home a remarkable haul of awards.
I saw the wave rise up. It was big and black like a mountain.
बच्ची अपने घर में सो रही है और पेट्रोल डाल के जिंदा जला दिया इन दोनों मंचों ने.
为什么这么孩子个人贩子到底偷到哪里去了？
The votes are coming in now. 太辛苦了。我们当时就是很想简单的把孩子带出去。
How did you shut down the Singapore Stock Exchange?
That traffickers prey upon these women and girls.
We've picked a new way to remember people. It's a new way to celebrate their lives.
China is now too large for the rest of the world to absorb this enormous capacity.
We were supposed to have a demographic dividend. That's becoming, in fact, a demographic disaster now.
That's the claim.
Stay tuned to CNA. Understand Asia.